liberty, 'cause we're doing it all again. Hey, hey, yes, we're doing it all again. Oh, 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 oh. You make a blind man see, make a lame man walk again. You cause the dead to rise, and that's why we dance in liberty. That's why we dance in liberty, 'cause we're doing it all again. Oh, 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 'cause you're doing it all again. Oh, 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 'cause you're doing it all again. Oh, 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 'cause you're doing it all again. Oh, 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 you're still saving. You're the same God. You're still healing. You're the same God. Still creating. You're the same God, same God. Same God. Chain breaking. Chain breaking. Oh, the same God. And we're doing it all again. Yes, we're doing it all. Hey, hey, yes, we're doing it all again. He won't change. You won't change. You're the same God. You're never ending, Jesus. Never ending, the same God. Hallelujah. Hey, He won't change. You won't change. You're the same God. You're never ending. Never ending, the same God. Hey, you are Jesus, the same God. And I call you holy God. Yeah, you made a way. The same God. You keep on looking out for me, yeah. My provider, say you're my provider, and you're doing it all again. Said you're doing it all again. 'Cause you're doing it all again. My God is doing it all again. 'Cause you're doing it all again. Over and over and over. Every time I need something, you keep on showering it all down. You're doing it all again. Said you're doing it all again. You're doing it all again. We honor you, Jesus. Hallelujah. We lift you up in this place. There is no name higher than the name of Jesus. We worship you, God. Hallelujah. Come on, put your hands together. We make you bigger. We shout your name. We make you
Hello, everyone. My name is Pastor Tony Phillips, and we are in the middle of Love and Justice Month, a sermon series here at Higher Ground. So, Love and Justice embraces the concept that God is not only a God of love, but He's also a God of justice. And we're discussing the issues around the protests, the Black Lives Matter movement, and all of the complex, complicated, sometimes painful emotions and stories that go along with it. So I've interviewed a number of people, and I'll interview someone else today. This past week, I interviewed Pastor Dave Hinson, our senior pastor here. I interviewed Tony Schaefer, one of our church leaders, and today I'm going to interview Mike Reckard. Now, what I want to talk to you about today is the least of these. And I'm coming out of the book of Matthew. It's Matthew chapter 18. And it talks about the parable of the wandering sheep. Now, this parable is actually both in Matthew and in the book of Luke. Today, I'm going to focus on the book of Matthew because I believe that this parable of the wandering sheep, it has something to say about Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. So what this says, what this parable starts off with, is the disciples talking about who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus answers them by telling them that a little child represents the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So let's read for a second Matthew 18, verses 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what it says is, at that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Jesus called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." And then verse 4 really gives us what we need to understand for what is later the parable of the wandering sheep. It says, "Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." So he focuses on whoever takes the lowly position. And you'll see that this concept of a lowly position, or what I'll talk about in a few minutes, the least of these, is a consistent theme not only throughout the book of Matthew and the gospel, but throughout the entire Bible. So what happens in the parable of the wandering sheep? Many of us know this as the story of the 99 versus the 1. Matthew 18, verse 10, it says, "See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. What do you think?" And here comes the parable. "If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders, will he not leave the 99 on the hills to go look for the one that has wandered off? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he is happier about that one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should perish." And what we see is a concern for the one, the few that are in the lowly position, the weak, the oppressed. This is a theme we see over and over again. And it's the understanding, it helps us understand why we can say something like Black Lives Matter without saying that all other lives don't matter. It's not either or. It's an emphasis on the weaker, the oppressed, the outcast, the stranger. This is God telling us that we as Christians, now I'm talking to Christians, we are called to stand by, for, and with the oppressed, with those who are weaker. So by saying Black Lives Matter, we're saying the least of these matter to us. And it's not that the 99 don't. It's not that the majority doesn't matter. But that we have to pay special attention. Biblically speaking, we have to pay special attention to those who are oppressed, in need, poor. It's our job to speak for them, to stand with them. Now, I want to show you where else we see this concept of the least of these. So, in Matthew 25, Jesus is addressing the people and he's telling them that whatever you do for the least of these, and he says specifically the hungry, those in prison, those who are sick, whatever you do for the least of these, you do unto me. Literally, he's telling us that when you are kind to the poor, when you help the needy, when you stand with the oppressed, you are literally helping Jesus. I don't think that most people have an understanding of how strong the language is in the Bible around this idea of helping the needy, saving the lost. This is our calling as Christians. And so one of the things that I want to do is I want to share some stories with you to help you understand where this concept of Black Lives Matter comes from, where the angst, the anxiety, the anger, the frustration, where is that coming from in our society? I want you to understand some of the things that maybe, just maybe, have gone by you, over your head. They haven't been visible in your sight. So that we can have the level of compassion and empathy that we're required to have as Christians. Now, one of the concepts that I want you to be very aware of is this concept of implicit bias. I talked a little bit about this earlier this week with Tony Schaefer. Implicit bias is the bias that we all have, and I want to talk about it today as the bias that we have but don't see. So it's the times when we're actually pushing systematic racism, systematic injustice, but we don't realize it. You see, everything is not an in-your-face, angry attack on those who are weaker than us in society. So often, we're doing things to hurt those people, the weak ones, the poor, the widow, the orphan, the stranger. We do things to hurt them without even knowing it. We push these stereotypes. We do things with our inner circle and exclude those who are not in our inner circle. But we don't even realize it. We do it by accident. And that doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It just means that you may need to see some things that you're doing that you're not seeing right now because they're going against these principles that we're studying that tell us to protect the oppressed, to help the needy, to defend the poor. So I'm going to ask Mike Record to join us, and we're going to have a little conversation today about what it's been like to be a black man in this country. All right. All right. So here we have Mike Record. Mike, welcome.
Thank you, Tony. Glad to be here.
So you're a member of Higher Ground.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit just about you, about who Mike Record is, and then I'll ask you a couple questions. Yeah. Who is Mike Record?
Who is Mike Record? Mike Record is a father of 5.
All right.
A divorcee.
Okay.
A gentleman who was saved about 4 or 5 years ago.
Wow. Okay.
Here at McEachern Methodist, and
Awesome.
then joined Higher Ground, and
Cool.
been walking the walk ever since, and seeking Him.
Okay. And you're a basketball fanatic, right?
I am a basketball junkie.
He said more than fanatic, junkie.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And I'm also the head of the basketball ministry here at McEachern Methodist, or Higher Ground.
Okay. Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about, like, we're trying to it's Love and Justice Month. We're trying to understand the dynamics behind Black Lives Matter movement, behind the protests that we're seeing all over the world.
Right.
And I know that there are a lot of people who they just don't understand what's happening.
Right.
They're seeing this police violence, but there's so much more to it. So tell me just a little bit about your experience. What has been your experience as an African American man
Right.
in this country?
Well, let me go back to 1990
Okay.
when I was in Lubbock, Texas, at Texas Tech, going to college.
Okay.
And I had the moment that every black male in America will experience at one point,
Okay.
which is trauma. It's a traumatizing experience
Right.
when you realize how the police tend to look at black males in this country.
Right.
In my experience, I was probably 20 years old, junior at Texas Tech, and I was doing some late night studying.
It's Texas Tech Red Raiders.
Get your guns up. That's right. Texas Tech Red Raiders.
And so did you play basketball at Texas Tech?
I did not. I
okay.
did not.
So you're a student.
I'm a student at Texas Tech. Studying late one evening, about 11:30, in what they call the stacks, or the tunnels, which is underground study hall type situation.
Okay.
At the time, we had a purse snatcher running around campus stealing females' purses.
Okay.
And excuse me.
Go ahead.
You can edit that, right?
Mike Record takes the call on camera.
I love the editing.
Okay.
All right.
Start over with at the time.
At the time, I was a student at Texas Tech, and I was studying in the stacks at about 11:30 on a Thursday night. It's 20-some years later, and I still remember it was a Thursday night.
Right.
But it was 11:30, and at the time, there was a purse snatcher stealing women's purses all over Texas Tech campus.
Okay.
And, of course, it was an African-American male. So that evening, and I take that back. I shouldn't have said of course, but
it's relevant to the story.
Yeah,
I understand
right,
the
right.
point. You're saying, like, stereotypically so.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And another stat I need to give you, at the time when I was at Texas Tech, there was 20,000 undergrads
Okay.
and 460 some African American non-athletes.
Okay.
So a very small percentage of African Americans on
Right.
the campus.
Right.
And what happened was, I was walking out of the stacks 11:30, and 2 police officers approached me,
Yeah.
and they said, we got some questions for you, sir. And I said, well, what's this all about? And they said, well, you fit the description. And I said, I fit the description of what? Of the purse snatcher. And they asked me to step outside, and I stepped outside, and the four words that I think every African American male has heard at one point, and it's the turning point for you, is, would you please turn around? And when I turned around, you know, they cuffed me immediately, put me in the back of the car, and drove me down to the police station. I was in the police station for all of 30, 35 minutes, and several officers walked by, looked in the window, and I really felt like an animal in a cage on display. Wow. And then the sergeant who was on duty came in, uncuffed me, and said, Mr. Record, we're going to let you go. And almost like he's doing me a favor by letting me go. And I was walking out, and I was, you know, relieved to be walking out, and something at the moment hit me and said, ask what the description of the black male they were looking for was. So I asked, and they were looking for a 5'10", light-skinned, 175-pound African-American male. At the time, I was 6'3", 220 pounds, and chiseled. You know, I was lifting a lot of weights at the time, and nowhere near the description.
Wow.
And that's when it first hit me that you can't win, you know, and it really, really felt like the police were against me.
And you're in college at this point.
I am in college.
And so thank God you were studying.
Yes.
Not coming from a party.
No.
You know, which college students do, drinking, whatever.
Right.
So, I mean, that situation, you made it out of there.
I made it out.
But it could have been so much worse.
Yeah. Well, and I think a big part of it is the way I articulate.
Right.
You know, immediately puts the police at ease, or it takes a little bit of the edge off.
Right.
Although they were still not the friendliest and still definitely looking down on me.
Right.
But I do.
Because in that moment, you become a criminal.
Oh, absolutely. And I felt like one. I absolutely felt like one.
Yeah.
And like I said, that was in 1990, and it's one of the experiences that I will never forget and remember like it was yesterday, and it hurt me to the core.
Wow.
It cut me to the core.
Wow. Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that. Now, about the whole articulation thing.
Yes.
I've had so many people say to me, wow, you speak so well.
Yes.
You're so articulate.
Yes. Let me tell you what I hear. And I've heard it my whole life. I mean, since a child, I've had white people come up and say, Mike, you articulate so beautifully. Or when they're describing me, they say, Mike Record is so articulate. But what I hear, in the part most of them do not say out loud, is for a black guy. That's the other part of the sentence they leave off. And people don't understand how offensive that can be and how that can be taken, and that hurts just as well.
Yeah.
Right?
And why is that? Why does that?
I mean, what makes me any less than you, or, you know, that it should be such a shock? What a shock that this black guy speaks well. So what are you saying about my people?
Right. So essentially what they're saying is most black people don't speak well.
That's exactly what they're saying.
So I'm really surprised that you do.
That's right. And during this time of Black Lives Matter, one of the
and they actually think they're complimenting you.
Oh, they absolutely think it's a compliment, and you know, God bless them, because a lot of them do mean well.
They mean well.
They mean well.
Exactly. They mean well.
But they do not understand how offensive that is.
Yeah.
But you know, during this time of Black Lives Matters, one of the things I also realized is that I'm part to blame for the problem, because if these people who are meaning well, and they're truly my brothers and sisters, I should have been correcting them all along the way instead of staying silent. And you know, that's one of the little things I've vowed to do, that I'm always going to correct people from this point forward.
I have I understand, and I feel the same pressure to do that, to correct people. But I'll tell you what my challenge has been is
Yes.
that when you correct people and they don't want to hear what you have to
They
say,
become defensive.
they become defensive and you become the angry black person.
That's right. That's right.
And that's something that I've always not wanted to be,
right.
is the angry black guy.
Right.
But I mean, there's reason why, because they don't want you in their churches and country clubs and schools and
That's right.
offices.
That's right.
When you are the guy who's
And
complaining or angry,
and it's amazing how little you have to say to become that angry person.
right?
You know, it's like every single day of our lives, we're one sentence away from crossing that line, and that is a crazy thing to say.
Yep.
But that is how we
That's
live
how we
our
live
lives
every
every
day.
day.
Yeah.
Every day.
Every day. And I think with all of the protests happening,
Yes.
you know, I definitely feel like, all right, now is the time to speak up. But it's still not easy.
No.
It's still really difficult. I definitely still fear repercussions.
Right.
You know, I don't want to offend someone, but and it's tough. It's tough to tell someone, hey, what you just said, that is, I mean, immediately they're like, are you saying I'm racist?
Well, the funny thing is the repercussion part is real. It's very, very real. And a lot of people will try their best to accept what you're saying at the
Yeah.
time. But 1 week later, 2 weeks later, you
Yeah.
can see how things have
Have
shifted. And
You know, like I remember just realizing how close people were
yes,
in the workplace. They'd start talking about going on vacation together.
yes,
I was like, what?
yes,
And
yes,
like, I never
yes,
even had
yes.
lunch with them. And like, we're all on the same team. You guys go on vacation together?
That's right.
So, you know, somebody oversteps a rule. It's okay. Hey, you didn't mean, you know, it's
Right.
fine. You meant well, no problem. They overlook it. And it happens all the time, every day.
Right.
But when that person who's not in the inner circle,
The guy on the outside.
the least of these,
The least.
the one
The
who's
one.
not the 99, the one
Yes, sir.
who in this case happens to be the African American or a person of color,
And
when they,
you say in this case, I will say in many cases.
in yes.
many cases.
Right. When they break the rule, then it's lights out.
That's right.
You've
That's right.
broken this rule.
That's
You need to
right.
be punished. You're getting. I mean, it's a nightmare all
Yeah.
of a sudden.
Yeah, and the rules are there for a reason.
And the
all,
rules are
all,
there
all
for
of
a
a sudden
reason,
they're
and
there
we're
for
just following the rules.
That's it. That's
And
it.
I mean, that's literally how people get fired. They, you know, they keep a file. Like everyone breaks. You can't follow all the rules. It's impossible.
Right.
And actually do your job. And so then at the end of the day, you know, now they got a reason, and it's exercised against you. Well, hey, these are the rules. But
Right.
if you look at who else has broken those rules,
Right.
it's just nobody says anything.
Yeah.
And it may not be a gross break, you know.
But it doesn't. If it's even one person that is getting away with something that you're not allowed to get away with, it is not fair.
Well,
It
what
is not
happens
fair.
is that's racism.
Yes.
Because it happens to the people who are in power are of one ethnic background, the people who are not are a different ethnic background.
Right.
So what it keeps happening that the people who are suffering from it are the people of color. That
Which,
at least
once
of
again, I
these.
go back to the statement is the majority of the power is being held by a certain race, and we are the one. We are the one of the
The
99
outcast,
that are
the
the
99.
outcast.
And what I want to say today is what's important is to understand your own implicit bias, to look at the systems around you,
Right.
and instead of just taking advantage of them,
Yep.
say, am I excluding someone? And this is true
Yeah.
when we're talking about women, when we're talking about not just African Americans, other people of color,
Right.
when we're talking about people who are disabled, you know, the elderly,
Right.
like always making sure that we're not excluding someone and doing it even when we don't mean any harm.
Well, it goes back to a very, very simple rule. Put yourself in somebody else's shoes
Yeah.
before you act. It's that simple. In fact, in business, I tell people all the time, everything need to know in business, you learned at the age of 3 years old in the sandbox.
Right.
The personalities, the people do not change.
Yeah.
Only the zeros at the end of the checks change or in the budget, but the personalities are all the same as the sandbox.
Well, I think what I want people to understand today is that just because you mean well doesn't mean that you're not participating in some of the negative behavior
Right.
that is called injustice. You can mean well and still participate, still hurt others, even though you mean well. And it's that implicit bias. It's understanding what's happening systematically and stepping aside and listening to what people who don't look like you, or in this case, what we're talking about today is, Black Lives Matter, African Americans, but
Right.
really it's beyond that. And saying to yourself, okay, am I being unfair, even though it may be mistaken?
Right. What I'd like to say is, be part of the solution. Let's all be part of the solution, even myself,
Yeah.
because like I said, I vowed from this point forward to help my brothers and sisters by
Yeah.
explaining how they're offending me,
Yeah.
and I'm 51 years old. So I've literally been going through this or experiencing this
Yeah.
for 40 some years
Yeah.
since I first heard the words. He articulates well.
Wow.
And the other thing I would ask people to do is be more aware.
Yeah.
Just be more aware of your statements and what's going on around you
Absolutely.
and how what you say affects others.
Absolutely. And I would agree with those two things, to be more aware and to speak up. We're saying silence is violence. Please speak up. And that means for us as well
Absolutely.
as for white people or non-African Americans, that we would please speak up. So I'm Pastor Tony Phillips. This is Mike Record. We're here at Higher Ground Church, and I want to thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for speaking up on the behalf of those who are oppressed, on behalf of the least of these. Because like Jesus says, whatever you do to the least of these, you do unto me.
Amen.
All right.
Who are love, you bring light to the darkness. You give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. To you only, Jesus. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath your